of those very early motor patterns that we see in infants. And today we're going to go on and start looking at some further motor skills that we see that lead to locomotion. So locomotion is moving from place to place. Okay. I'm going from point A to point B, and I can locomote on one leg, I can hop, I can locomote on two, or I can locomote on all fours. Okay. So we've got some examples. Remember we mentioned on Wednesday the idea of crawling, where they're moving themselves along on their tummies and their legs on the floor, right? And they're just kind of dragging themselves along with their hands like a commando crawl. Yes, please. Here. Give her another chair so she can follow along. All right, so commando crawl. All right, on my stomach, pull myself along, creeping, hands and knees. Right? We also mentioned butt scooting, cruising along the furniture once they got themselves to pulling upright. Okay? We're going to skip, make sure that you look at these film clips. We're going to skip those because we saw some similar ones on Wednesday. So, once we've got those kind of very basic locomotor skills, allow me to get from A to B, allow me to start being inquisitive. I can start exploring, I can get across the room if something catches my attention. Right? You can encourage those behaviors by moving the toy. Don't always pick the toy up and take it to the child. Put it a little way away so they have to get to it. All right? So there's different strategies we can use to encourage them to locomote as much as possible. And then, obviously, for typically developing humans, we're going to see the onset of walking. We're bipedal animals, we walk on 2 feet, and that gives us all kinds of advantages. It's why our eyes are in the front of our head, not on the top of our head. All right? If you look at animals that move on 2 feet, they're up there, eyes are a little higher, or that some are right on the top. So the way we've evolved is to do with the fact that we're upright. Walking, by definition, is a motor pattern that has 50% phasing. So what that means is that each leg does half the work for the entire pattern to occur, right? So while one leg is doing one thing, the other leg's doing something else, but it also has to do the same thing. And there has to be a period of double support. So if you watch someone walk, there's always a point in time where both feet are on the floor. Always. There also has to be a period of single support. That's what makes walking difficult initially when they're very young. Right? What I've got, think about what we're talking, this postural control. How do I get control of all this wobble? Right? Well, in order to walk, I have to control the wobble enough to lift one foot off the floor. Okay? So that's why it takes humans 12 months to get to walk. Okay? Other animals walk within a couple of hours when they're born. So double support followed by single support. It's also what makes it tricky as we get older, right? So as we look at what happens as we get older, having to be on one leg is always causing a problem. So early walking, the brain's goal is don't fall over. Right? So in order to do that, well, we talked in the biomechanics lecture about what do I have to do to maintain stability? What are the two things I've got to do? Widen base, lower center of gravity, right? That's exactly what we see the brain do when it first tries to initiate walking. Feet are very wide, legs are bent. Often the toes will be turned out because that increases the base a little bit more. And it's barely even walking, it's waddling, right? But waddling is our first form of walking. I don't take one foot off the ground for very long at all, just enough to actually get myself to move forwards, right? Hands are up high. And obviously at this point, our rate controllers are going to be strength and the brain's ability to work out how to balance on one leg. Can I shift my center of gravity? Can I tighten up the muscles on that side? This is a new piece of film. This is going to be cute. Cute, cute, cute. And they took it from the side, unfortunately. She's not right at the beginning. She's probably been walking a few weeks, possibly even a month or so. A couple of weeks. Her hands are already quite low. Cute girl. All right. So we don't see what we would do for walking when the brain's first trying to organize this pattern. As we get more proficient, then this is not very effective, right? I mean, I want to get over there and I'm doing this. That's not very effective. So the brain starts to adjust the motor brain so that it can get to point B quicker, right? More effectively and faster. So it starts to, as it gets more confident and we start to build more strength, then the brain starts to do a trade-off, right? We can't be stable and highly mobile at the same time. So at some point, if I want to be more mobile and I want to get somewhere quicker, I have to be more unstable. I've got to take a risk. And that's what we see the brain doing as the walking pattern develops. It starts to increase the stride length. So instead of just picking the foot up and putting it back down again, I start stepping forwards. But to step forwards, I have to stand on, bless you, I have to stand on one leg for a lot longer, all right? So I have to be less stable, very small base of support for longer, all right? As they get more practice, we start to see the pelvis rotating. So there's only so big a step I can take without turning my hips. Okay? So when we walk, right, we see the hips move. And we start to see some opposition. partly because of our Newton's law opposite reaction. If I'm swinging this leg forwards, then something the other side has to happen as well. Partly because it helps us maintain our balance and adds force in the direction we're trying to go. Ooh. Go back. See what we've got on this one. I don't know, her hands aren't in a very helpful position there. All right, so, but ignore the arms and look at what her legs and her feet and the amount of time she's on one foot. Right? Much longer than the little girl in the previous film clip. And remember, all these film clips are up at your website for the textbook, so make sure that you go back, look at them again, really see what they're trying to show you. Because we tend to look at these movements and take things for granted. We don't analyze closely enough what's happening. We just go, oh, well, yeah, she's taking a bigger step. Well, why is she taking a bigger step? What's going on, right? So by about 4, given typical development, the walking pattern looks pretty similar to what we see adults do. Right? They're able to take a long step, there's some hip rotation, the arms are used, and it looks very mature by 4, usually. Right? Their legs are getting longer, their heads are in much better proportion with the rest of their body by that point. Right? They're not so top heavy at 4 as they are at 12 months. So the brain's able to keep them stable with less work. As we get older, we start to see some patterns occur that go back to maximizing the stability. So I have to trade off to become really mobile. But if you watch someone who's 80 walk, then they tend to have gone back a little bit to, I need to make sure that I'm stable, right? Not often consciously. The brain's just going to get to a point. If you're 80 and you fall, the consequences can be pretty bad. Right? So, I start to slow down, I shorten my stride length, that means I don't have to balance on one foot for as long. We don't see so much pelvis rotation, right? They tend to walk a little bit more, feet start to go a little bit wider. They don't tend to go right back out to where they were when we first started. But if you watch your peer group walk from behind or in front, then you get a reasonably close foot placement. Right? And the feet are certainly under or narrower than the hips during walking. What you see with an older population is that they walk as if they're on a ladder or a railway line. Right? They don't go out here, but they do tend to walk with a slightly wider base. Okay? And depending on how strong they stay, how active they stay, how confident they are in moving, you may or may not start to see them hold on to things as a balance. The minute you hold on to something, it increases your base of support. Because now you've got another contact point. So if I hold on to something, my base of support is bigger, and the chances of me moving my center of gravity outside that base and falling become much less. If we consider what the rate control controllers would be in an elderly population, then many of those that we see are to do with the aging process. Right? So, what structural constraints do I get as I get older? What happens to my muscles? Muscles get weaker, right? Even if I train, I see some loss of muscle mass. If I manage to stay active and I keep moving and I keep exercising, then I can maintain as much strength as possible, but I'm still going to be weaker than I was in my 20s and 30s. So strength, loss of muscle mass, flexibility, arthritis, so I lose joint mobility because the joint hurts. So I'm not going to use such a big range of motion because this hurts, so I just do this. Okay. Think about all the things that are going on. We talked about the skeletal system, we talked about the muscular system, we talked about the adipose system. Think about what's happening as we move through the lifespan that would impact what you see happen in the walking pattern. It's all about the triangle. If I change a constraint, then the theory says I see a different pattern. By different doesn't mean I run instead of walk. It might do, but it might just be I walk differently. All right, so after walking, most children are going to transition to some running. Another form of bipedal locomotion. Okay. Most of us run somewhere around 18 months on average. So we walk about 12 months, that takes the brain about 6 months to get the walking off well enough, get it organized well enough that it's going to add some more momentum and some more force and turn it into a run. Okay. So it has to practice the walking first before it can try making it more complicated and turning it into a run. So running is also a 50% phasing. Right? Legs do half the pattern each. The difference is that double support scenario. We don't see a phase of double support in running. We do see a single support, but the single support is followed by a flight phase. That means I have nothing touching the floor, in theory. Okay. So I land on one leg, I push off that leg, I land on the next leg, but there's a point in time where there's nothing on the floor. Okay. Now, I've got gravity pulling on me, right? I've only been walking for 6 months, so my muscles aren't very strong yet. My brain's still learning how to balance me. So what we see when we start running is that it looks very much like early walking did. We start to run and our feet get really wide and our knees bend and our hands come, right? It looks like the walking did, because the brain's like, oh, okay, if I'm going to go faster, I need to make myself a little bit more stable again. So it goes back to things that allow it to keep the stability. Wider base, lower center of gravity, right? And then it tries to up the power and the force that it's applying. Very up and down, right? You don't see kids when they first start running lean forwards, because that's not stable. So running tends to be very like this. Short strides, not a lot of rotation. Right? I'm not actually sure that I would classify that as running. If I had a decent piece of film that I could slow down enough frame by frame, looking at that quickly, I'm not convinced there's a flight phase there. I think that's fast walking, right? But that's one of the things that you've got to look for. Okay? But it's fast. His brain is clearly trying to transition to running, right? So now we want to think about what are the rate limiters here. If I'm going to transition from walking to running, what do I need to be able to do to get my body weight off the floor while gravity is pulling me in the other direction? So then I have a lot more strength in my legs to get myself off the floor. There's got to be a flight phase. What does it take to jump versus stand still or walk? Strength and coordination, right? And the coordination element is an interesting one to look at, because it's not so much the coordination of the left side and the right side as it is coordinating the speed of the limb. Because technically, running is falling, right? I have to be up in the air, and if I want to move forwards, my center of gravity has to be moving over my base of support. So, when we look at running, really we have to fall. That means that in order not to land on my face, I've got to be able to get that foot forwards very quickly. So it's not coordinating left and right, it's how quickly can I swing this leg to get it in front of me before I fall. So the task constraint becomes adding speed. So got to be a little bit careful about how do I phrase that. Okay. Do I tell them to beat me to the fence? Or do I tell them to go as quickly as they can? Not the same thing. Right? So the terminology that you use is important. If I'm a proficient runner, then the brain's doing the trade-off. In order to be a good runner, to be capable at running, I have to trade off stability against mobility. So I'm going to increase the stride length, I'm going to lean further forwards, I'm going to try to keep legs and arms in the same plane of motion as much as possible, because we want all that force going forwards, not sideways. Right? Sometimes you'll watch kids run, and if you watch them from the back, what you see as their back foot leaves the floor is this. Right? They kind of swing, particularly if they've got big feet, they tend to swing rather than lift. Right? Well, this is very ineffective because it kicks force out the wrong way. So that's a good point of teaching to pick up, is trying to correct what happens as the back foot leaves the floor. Narrow base of support, I'm on one foot, I never have 2 feet on the floor, so my only base of support is the size of that foot. The better I get, the more trunk rotation you see, the more opposition we'll see with the arms. Fundamental running doesn't talk a lot about knee drive or hand drive, right? Because those are more sport type skill running. Right? Fundamental running just means I've got a good flight phase, I'm leaning a little bit, I'm using my arms in opposition. My arms should be bent. So, we take a beginner runner and we watch them. They're going to get faster. Part of getting faster is to do with these qualitative changes in the movement pattern, the mechanics of the pattern. That increases the speed, right? Effective running is fast, so the brain's trying to create a motor pattern that is designed to go quicker. Plus they're growing, so that adds speed because their leg length is longer, their stride length is longer, they can apply force over a longer period of time. So that makes them faster without necessarily being better. So we mentioned this a little bit earlier in the semester. We've got to be careful when our assessment involves the outcome. Because I could assess this child and they would be faster. Doesn't mean that their running is very much better. Right? They could just be faster because they grew. So we have to be a little bit careful about how do we set up our motor skill assessments. That's why we like the TGMD, right? Because we're looking at the process of the skill, not the product of the skill. Right? Many assessments look at product. When you do vertical jump tests in XFIZ, we're looking at product. There's nothing about how do you do, I mean, only the technique, but I'm not measuring or scoring you on how you did the vertical jump. The score is how high did you jump. Right? So when that's okay, because a vertical jump is measuring power in the muscle, it's not measuring motor skill. But if I'm supposed to be measuring someone's skill, and I measure how fast they run, that's not very appropriate. So, as we get older, if we watch elderly people running, then we see the same kind of thing happen with their running pattern that we see with the walking pattern. Okay. The brain starts to prioritize stability, balance over speed. So, stride length shortens, the range of motion, how much we swing the free leg shortens, how high the kick is at the back shortens. Right? Speed slows down, I'm losing type 2 fibers anyway, remember? Type 2 fibers are my quick ones, so if I'm losing the quick fibers, I'm going to slow down anyway. And then the brain will sometimes slow you down a little bit more to make sure you're safe, depending upon how confident it feels. How much exercising have you done? So just let me, I should have pulled this up earlier. Let me show you this. old doesn't mean I can't run. Being older means that in order to run, I had to make certain decisions during my adulthood to keep me healthy enough and strong enough to keep running. Right? Does my running look the same as it did when I was 40? No. Is it great that I can still run? Yes. Okay. If you're going to live until you're 85, wouldn't it be great to live until you're 85 mobile and not in a wheelchair or having to use a walker? Right? So you can see the difference in the pattern. Much less hip rotation, shorter strides, not so much forward lean, right? Stability becomes the key. I don't know how to get back down here now. Thank you. So, the choices we make are going to impact this. Okay? Do I keep moving? Do I become sedentary? What choices of movement do I make? What nutritional choices do I make? Do I smoke? Do I drink a lot? Do I eat a lot of candy? Do I drink soda? Do I choose to stay inside when it snows rather than go out and throw snowballs? Right? Snow is fun. Right? So, the rain is fun. I used to love going out in the rain when I was young in England with my welly boots. The best thing is to jump as high as you can and splash in the puddle and splash everybody else. It's the most fun, right? But you as the adults have to make it fun. Because if what we go is, oh, it's cold, let's light the fire instead, then the kids are not going to learn that being in the snow is fun. Okay? Depends where you grow up. Okay? If you're in Montana or North Dakota, then you learn to have fun in the snow because otherwise you stay in your house for 6 months of the year. Okay? But if you grow up in Arizona or Southern California, what happens when you go somewhere where there's snow or it's raining? Okay? We hibernate instead of taking advantage of the environment. So the choices we make change what's going to happen down the road. Rate controllers, as we get older, when we look at those gentlemen, okay, they have to generate a lot of force and be able to stay strong enough to maintain their balance. Okay? That means that the older we get, the smaller changes in constraints have a bigger impact on the motor pattern. So at your age, if you get a little bit weaker than you are right now, chances are you still walk and run the same way. But if I'm 80 and I get just a little bit weaker, then the impact on the running pattern will be quite dramatic. So we don't have so much leeway with those constraints the older we get. So it means I don't get to work really, really hard in my 20s and my 30s and get really, really strong and then get into my 60s and go, okay, I did all the work, now I can chill out and relax. Now I have to work harder to stay strong. Because the small change can make a big difference. So, most of you hopefully will have the ability to still run in your 70s and 80s, hopefully. Those of you that are athletes, those injuries come back and kick you in the butt, trust me. My gymnastics ones are kicking me in the butt right now, okay? So the athletes will have a little more to deal with. than the non-athletes as you get older. On the other hand, your motivation to stay in shape will be better. Right? And your strategies and your skill set to stay in shape are better. What if you don't have the opportunity? What if you live somewhere where there's very little opportunity to move as an older person? Right? Might not be a swimming pool, might not be anywhere safe to go walk or run. So opportunity, environment can impact what we see happen as someone gets older. And also individual constraints, functional constraints. If they're not motivated to move, they're not going to move. So motivation, fear, if I'm really terrified of falling and breaking my hip, how does that impact what kinds of movements I do and don't do? Am I out on the track running and long jumping with those men? No. So fear can play a huge role in what we see happening as people get older with their running patterns. All right, so Dr. Culpepper is going to take you through jumping, hopping, and leaping and other forms of locomotion next week. So please behave. Don't embarrass me. Also, the Wednesday flexi period has to go away. So that's the bad news. Because we didn't see the film this morning, so that means because you're out on the playground next week, we can't watch the film during the lab time now. We've labs done. So I'm going to get someone to run your lab video, Dr. Parrish's lecture during Wednesday class time. And then you can finish your checklist and hand them in. All right? Everybody on the same page with me, know what I'm talking about? Okay, so you've got class every day next week, and you have lab at the CDC. So as of next week, you only have to come to lab 1 day a week. Make sure you are there by 8:45. Do not lose participation points because you turn up at 8:46 instead of 8:45. Okay? I want to hear amazing things. So email me if you need me. I'm on a 7-hour time difference, but I can email with you. I can Skype if we arrange it ahead of time. Yes, sir.
Are we getting a TED Talk?
Oh, yes. All of that. Thank you. You were so keen on making sure you all knew what you were doing next week. Thomas, not here. Brad. Look at these. Some of you have questions that I've written. Right? If you think you can answer them, today is not the day. Because I have to get ready for class and I have to get out here. Alright? So, remember that you've got questions to answer. Come and answer them when I get back. Okay? Ivy, not here. Sarah. Aaron, not here. Hazel, not here. John?
No.
Carrie Ann? Raven? Look through them, look at the questions, hand them back, because I haven't logged them yet, but go home with them. Check my adding up, one without a name. Rebecca. Kelsey. Edwin. Johnny. Marlena. Morgan. Zach. Dylan. Brittany. Danny. Sarah Sense and Sarah Stin. Edgar. I'm thinking that one's yours. Thank you.
Dr. Wall, this is still recording back here.
Oh, thank you.